Good morning. This is Carol Dixon, and I'm with the Idaho Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Welcome to our February Parent Webinar Series, and we are happy to have Dr. Roger Olson join us. And Dr. Olson is from St. Luke's Children's Center for Neurobehavioral Medicine. Dr. Olson is a clinical child psychologist with experience in a wide variety of settings such as schools, prisons, hospitals, and clinics. He has a passion for helping individuals and families thrive and live healthy lives, and he uses a strength-based approach to work collaboratively with others. Dr. Olson has earned his bachelor's degree at Boise State University and his graduate degree in psychology at George Fox University. Dr. Olson, we are so glad to have you with us this morning. Your topic today on emotional regulation and bonding is going to be really valuable to the parents and also to the professionals that we have joining us. A couple other points before we jump in with Dr. Olson is to let you know is that we do have a chat box for questions on the side. We will give those to Dr. Olson at the end, but feel free as you are listening to the presentation, if questions come up, send them out into the chat box. We'll be writing them down and then we'll be giving them to Dr. Olson to address in the end. And also our March webinar, we'd love to have you join us and let you know ahead of time. We have Liza Long, who is the author of The Price of Silence, A Mom's Perspective on Mental Illness, and she will be presenting in March. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Olson. Thank you again much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for letting me be here, and it's a privilege to come and talk with families, and I'm just excited, each day to be able to work with families and help them encourage their children's growth. And so it's fun to come and talk about parenting ideas and strategies. And so we're going to talk about what it means to be a parent and how we can better bond with our bond with our children and launch them into life. And so the metaphor that I like to use a lot of times in parenting is the ocean of emotion. I say that life is like an ocean, and parents and children are traveling together. And parenting is kind of like the Peace Corps. It's the toughest job you'll ever love. But sometimes it's hard to connect with our children in the midst of that tough job. So why is it hard for us to bond and connect at times with our children? Well, there's lots of reasons. There's lots of storms and stressors in life. Some of those stressors come from our own past histories of how we were parented, and some of the traumas or difficulties that we've been in or that we've experienced in our life. Some of the stress comes from our own emotions and how we've learned to cope with stress or to not cope very well with stress, perhaps. Also, the emotions of our children can become obstacles to connecting with them. And so also just general life stressors and separation and loss. So there's lots of reasons why it's hard to connect with children. But we have to, ultimately we have to find ways to connect with them in the midst of stress. We have to look for opportunities in the storms of life to connect with our children, because there will be trials in life, and that's a gift. And so I have a little story about it's about a little boat and his development. Let's have a little story time, since a lot of times reading with our children when they're little is a great time to connect with them. And so my kids are no longer little; they're 14 and 16, but sometimes we still like to read together. But here's a little story that kind of puts some things in perspective for the story that we'll be talking about today, the story of our lives as parents and what our story is going to be. Here's a little story to get us started. There once was a little brave boat who was born in a port quite remote. He started off small, but determined was he to grow and become, like his dad and his mom, quite big as a boat could be. So once he learned how to float, in the tide pools that little bold boat would dash and he'd splash without care in the world and without slicker or coat. At times, sneaker waves would come from the deep and bruise the small boat to the sand. In panic and fright, with all of his might, he'd scurry to Mom and Dad's hand. When the storm of fear had subsided again, he sped through the pools, out farther, and then to the currents beyond in the sun. Each day and then year saw him stronger, less fear, as his parents encouraged his flight. They were there a safe port, if need be, from the storm, then blessed each journey in magnificent form. Available, interested, responsive were they, and thus the tall boat stayed secure in the fray. Upon final christening, the launch of his life, the great daring ship accepted all strife, for his parents had taught him, in obstacles hide, open vistas to find on the other side. And so some of the key questions kind of based on that story is, how can we improve our own life navigation skills and dealing with the stress and the storms of life so that we can form healthy attachments to our children? And how can we learn to regulate our own emotions so our children will gain confidence in their own ability to navigate life's storms? Kind of like that little brave boat. He had to deal with some big waves and storms, and his parents were there to encourage his growth. And we have to kind of find the balance between overprotection or non-involvement. We need to be involved and responsive, but not overprotective and fearful so that we teach them to be fearful. So these are some of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves as parents. How do we find ways to regulate those emotions? Because really, I think that is one of the key ingredients of healthy parenting, is coming to terms with our own ways of dealing with emotions and being able to calm ourselves down when we need to be, because there's lots of times where our emotions get pretty heated in the parenting job. And so, let's get into a little bit more details into attachment and bonding. A healthy attachment bond helps establish a sense of security for children. So if we can find ways to manage our own emotions and be tuned into our children, that gives them an amazing sense of security to go out and brave the storms of life. And here's a quote I like that kind of talks about that. It's by Dr. Holmes. And there's a bibliography in the back of this PowerPoint that you'll see if you want some of these references. But he said, there's a reciprocal relationship between secure attachment and creative or playful exploration. Only when attachment needs are assuaged or met can the individual turn away from her attachment figure toward the world, whether inner or outer. So basically that's saying, once that child has this supportive, strong, healthy connection with their parents, can they then turn and play and explore and build their skills of self-confidence and ability to navigate the ups and downs of life. And not only can they face the challenges that they will see in the world, but also their challenges of their internal world, coming to terms with their own story and their own emotions and their thoughts and their doubts and their fears. They're going to be able to handle those internal storms as well, if there is that secure connection. And so this next slide says that parents with well-regulated emotions help children develop their own powers of self-regulation. And so a lot of times when people come into my office, they're asking me to help fix their child. And, that's appropriate at times, but a lot of times I have to switch the focus from changing the child's behavior to helping the parent value the relationship, value a healthy way to connect with your child in the midst of the ups and downs. And usually when our focus changes from changing behavior to valuing the child and valuing that relationship and having time to connect and play and enjoy life together, behaviors often change on their own when we take the focus off changing behavior. That's the paradox. And so that's one of my primary keys of parenting is, try not to focus on changing the behavior, but focus on valuing the relationship. And we're better able to do that if we can regulate our own emotions as parents. And later in the talk, we'll talk about some strategies that we can do as parents to kind of regulate those emotions so that we can better bond with our children. There's another quote by William Miniger. He says that it's difficult to give children a sense of security unless you have it yourself. If you have it, they catch it from you. That's kind of along the same lines that we're just talking about. We need to not focus so much on fixing our children's behavior, but really focus on coming to terms with who we are as parents and coming to love and accept ourselves and have a secure base in ourselves, and so that we can pass that on to our children naturally. And so on this idea of catching things, it is kind of the season where we're catching a lot of colds from one another, but in this context, we're talking about catching more healthy attachment patterns from parents, and sometimes we catch non-healthy attachment patterns and relational patterns from our parents. But many years ago, a researcher by the name of Mary Ainsworth, she was a attachment theorist and researcher in this kind of under the school started by John Bowlby in attachment research, and she was really curious about this parent-child bond, and she did this experiment called the strange situation experiment. And it examined the mother-child bond when the infant is scared. And it's a pretty fascinating experiment. You can look that up, and it's in some of the books that I listed in the back. But what they did, they actually had home visits for the first year of the baby's life. And I think they had 18 home visits for 4 hours each. So these researchers were in the home for hours and hours for that first year. And then at 18 months of age, the mother and the child came into the research studio, and they had a situation where they had a room where the mother and the child would play with some toys, and there was a chair for the mother to sit on, and the child would play with toys, and the kid's just 1.5 years old. And the mother's role was to help the infant feel safe, in this kind of new situation. And they wanted to kind of put the kid in some uncomfortable situations because, fear activates this attachment system. When the kid's fearful, they wanted to study how this child and the mother attach to each other. And so they studied the mother's response to the child's fear. And when they were kind of dysregulated and stressed out, how does the mother respond? And then they wanted to study how infants adapted to this maternal response. So they're really studying this just basic, emotional regulation issues and how we bond with our children. It's just fascinating studies that went on, several decades ago, and they keep, doing more and more, and they're advancing this attachment theory, and it's just fascinating. But this has been going on for decades, this research. And so what they found was that there was 4 different ways that kids attach to their parents at an early age. And in this next slide, you'll see these what the research found in these 4 attachment styles. About 2/3 of these kids were securely attached. 65% of these kids were securely attached. And what that means is the child was secure, happy, They were free to explore, just like the little brave boat. They were playing with the toys, and even though it was kind of a new situation, their mother was a secure base, and they were healthy, had a healthy attachment, so they were free to play because they knew that if something bad happened, their mother was right there and is going to be okay. That's a secure attachment because that mother provided for that first 18 months a healthy environment in the home where she was tuned into the child. And the researchers saw that the mothers were sensitive, they were consistent, they're quick to help if the child needed help. And here's what the child, their beliefs were that these researchers surmised were what the child believed. They believed and trusted that his or her needs will be met. Maybe not perfectly, but generally their needs are met, so they're pretty secure and able to explore. So that's 65% of the kids. 20% of the children had this avoidant attachment, and they were insecurely attached. So that first group, with the secure attachment group, 65%, that was secure group. Now these last three groups are the insecure attachment groups. So and then there's three different types of insecure attachment. 20% of the kids were avoidant attachment. They were not very explorative. They were kind of emotionally distant. They kind of were hesitant to get comfort from their mother, a little bit disengaged. So not a very strong attachment. And we ask ourselves, why weren't they attached to their children? Or why weren't they attached to their mothers? Well, here's part of the connection there. They subconsciously felt that their needs probably wouldn't get met consistently. So they weren't sure if they should go back to their mother or not, so they kind of just avoided. Probably because over that first 18 months, the mother wasn't that consistent in providing nurturing and supportive environment. And 10 to 15% of the kids had what we call this ambivalent attachment style to their mother. They were anxious, kind of like the avoidant group, but they were more insecure, and they were also aggressive at times. So sometimes they would be disengaged. Sometimes they would be overly attached to their parent and even hitting their parent. And the mother's response to these kids were inconsistent, sometimes sensitive, sometimes neglectful. And so the child learned that they can't rely on their needs being met. And so that's how they developed this ambivalent attachment style. And so the last insecure group was this disorganized attachment style, which was, again, 10 to 15%. These children were depressed, angry, and again, these are just 18-month-old children, completely passive, non-responsive a lot of the time. The mother's response was often extreme and erratic. Sometimes they were frightened by their kid's fear, and it kind of just had this cycle of the kid being fearful, the mother being fearful, and the kid getting more fearful. Sometimes the parents were overly protective and intrusive. And so the kids had this confused state. They had no strategy for getting their needs met because they didn't have a secure base in their parent. They couldn't rely on their parent as a safe harbor from the storms. And so they were just kind of had this disorganized style. And so it's very fascinating to see when we look at this research that, how our responsiveness to our children can help them be securely or insecurely attached in these various ways. And some other details about these patterns as these secure children would move toward the caregiver. The avoidant children would move away. The ambivalent children would move against, sometimes hitting their parent. The disorganized children had no consistent pattern of response. They would either freeze or collapse on the ground or lean against the wall. It was interesting. And in this research, what they did, initially, the parent and the child would go into the room, and then a stranger would come into the room, which was kind of a scary situation for the child, and they'd see how the child reacted. The secure kids would just go, eventually they might connect with their mom a little bit, but then they'd go back to play. And the other kids had more difficult times when the stranger came in. Then the mother would leave, and the kid would be in the room with the stranger for a few minutes alone. And then they studied how the child responded to that stressor. And then the mother came back, and then the stranger left. And then at the very end of the experiment, just for a few minutes, if the kid could tolerate it, the mother left the child alone in the room just for a few minutes, just to see how the child would respond. The secure children would kind of protest and be upset, but then they would be able to quickly calm down once the parent came back, and then explore again. The avoidant children had little protest when their mom left, but then they'd kind of hover nervously nearby when she came back. The ambivalent style children, they would protest when their mom left, but then they had trouble calming down once she came back. They were just emotionally, kind of melting down. And then the disorganized, like I said before, those kids in that group just had no coherent, consistent pattern that we could see, or that, the researchers could see. And so the secure kids, they learn that emotions can work. When I communicate my emotions through crying or talking, as these 18 months old are starting to talk, they learn that they can rely on their communication and their emotions to connect with others and solve problems and deal with stress. These children learned to engage with people emotionally, and they learned to be resilient and be able to bounce back from stress. They were easily soothed. They engaged in play easily. They had normal amounts of stress with that stranger that came in. They interacted well with the mother. And the parent was what we call the good enough mother. They weren't perfect. None of us are perfect. But they provided a secure base where they encouraged independence, but helped their kid deal with stress when they came back to the safe port in the storm. And even 3 months old can begin to learn self-soothing skills, as parents are nurturing and helping them deal with stress, like to be able to calm themselves down, to be able to sleep, to fall asleep on their own, without having to have the mother right there or a bottle to fall asleep. Even 3 months old, and even by 4 months old, kids can begin to sleep most of the night because they've learned these self-soothing skills. Without these self-soothing skills, a lot of times children's emotions are out of control beyond age 2, 3, 4, up in, into the older childhood and even adolescence that we see. So that secure attachment style is just amazing benefits for children. They have basic trust, they have positive self-image, high self-esteem, they have more autonomy, good problem-solving skills, goal orientation. They're more determined to work through problems that come in their lives. They have positive beliefs and a positive outlook on life, strong relationships, good coping strategies and skills, and good emotional control to be able to regulate those emotions again, regulate the storms, and behavioral flexibility. They don't just have to have one way of solving a problem. They can solve problems with a range of options because they're able to, handle life situations in a more fluid, flexible situation instead of being so rigid and stuck on one way of dealing with things. So amazing benefits of secure attachment. So, and we'll talk about more ways to encourage this in ourselves, and our children in that dynamic, in that relationship in a few minutes. But the kids in the avoidant group, they learn that emotions don't work, and I can't rely on anybody to help me out in life. Emotional detachment, they have few requests, lack of trust, relationship challenges, and the parents are typically dismissive. So that means that, when we dismiss our kids' emotions, they learn to avoid relationships because my needs don't get met in relationships. And then in the ambivalent attachment style, these children have a short emotional fuse. They have a fear of not being connected. So sometimes they try to control that connection. That's why they, hit the mother, hey, connect with me, whack. They have a hard time controlling behavior and emotions, poor self-soothing skills. They fear separation, have a confused self-image. And how these children get to this point is a lot of times we as parents, when we have these situations, we're preoccupied and with our own stuff, and so we're not too in tune with our children, or we're overly connected with them and intrusive and overly protective. So it's kind of that extreme up and down. The good news is that there's ways that we can learn new attachment skills so that we can connect with our children in better ways, even if we have some unhealthy ways of connecting with them. And let's see here. On the disorganized, the last group, again, we'll talk some more details about that last insecure attachment group. For these kids, the source of security, the parent, becomes the source of fear. And I mentioned this earlier, that the fear in the child caused fear in the parent, and then that causes more fear in the child. So you just have this downward cycle of fear and emotions that are out of control. And again, they're kind of in that confused daze, and often their parents have a disorganized style, frequently with unresolved trauma and loss. And so parents from these types of backgrounds that have had a lot of emotional upheaval in their own life, their own emotions are, dysregulated, as we say, and they have trouble calming themselves down. So naturally, if we can have trouble calming our own emotions down, we're going to have much difficulty dealing with the emotions of our children. And so then we get to this idea of how do we help parents from those types of insecure styles get back to this more responsive parenting style. And so on parental responsiveness to infant emotions, or we call it affect, it's just the body emotions that we see coming out on their expressions on their face, or their body, that's called affect. It's just this body driven emotion. Being responsive to our children's emotions is key to developing secure attachment. So parents who are tuned into their child's emotions help build that bond with their children. As parents, we need to sensitively respond with empathy and understanding of how the child's feeling. And so a lot of times when the kids' emotions are running wild, we have to be able to, what we call, feel and deal. To feel our own stress, but then deal with it in a healthy way so that we can understand and have empathy and even kind of feel the child's stress, but then help them deal with that in a calm way and help calm the storms down. A lot of times we have to give ourselves a time out and step back, take a breath, know that we have what it takes to handle the situation, and then respond consistent with our values, because we want to be loving and kind to our children, but also firm. We have to balance that firmness and love. So we respond, not react. If we're just reacting on our emotions, we're going to make mistakes and damage that attachment and that bonding. If we take a step back, calm our own emotions, and then respond with caring, consistency, firmness, and love, then that bond has a way of improving and even healing. And so this result would be emotional regulation. The child's emotions are regulated, and they're able to return to a state of felt security and playfulness. The child learns to expect that their needs will be reasonably met and that they can handle challenging situations. So as this cycle of soothing the daily storms is repeated, the brain is protected from chronic stress. And it's able to make more positive connections and enables the child to have a stronger self-soothing system, kind of an emotion regulation system. If the brain is in a constant state of stress, that can be very traumatizing to the child. Their emotions are going to be more dysregulated. They're going to have more difficulty with relationships. And so it's so essential that we develop this healthy bond with our child so that they can calm down their brain and be able to see life with a broader perspective and interact with others in a more respectful way and interact with themselves in a more loving manner. So it's a daily, even moment by moment, relationship interaction with our children that builds that bond and that connection with them, and it helps them do this key skill of emotion regulation. It's a life skill that will be needed for the rest of their lives. And so in addition to that strange situation research, has been some related research on adult attachment. And Mary Main did some research on the adult attachment interview. And so what this is, it's a structured interview with a researcher and a parent. And it measures what happens in the minds of adults regarding their family relationships and what it was like for them to be parented. And it asks parents about their own relationships with their parents when they were growing up. Were they closer to mom and dad? What happened during stressful times? What happened when your dad was angry or your mom was upset or sad or whatever. Was there major losses in your life when you were a child? Did you lose a parent when you were just a child? Was there other traumatic events? And so basically what this interview does, it kind of puts us back into childhood and in some of those stressful events that happened, and it kind of activates the attachment system. Just like the strange situation with the 18-month-old activated that attachment system, this adult interview kind of activates this attachment system and gets us thinking about how we connect and what was it like for us to be a child. So really we call it the stress test of the parental mind. And so the parent has to communicate memories and stories from their childhood while at the same time that they're regulating their emotions that these memories bring up. And so there's some predictable patterns based on this research of this adult attachment interview. This AAI, the adult attachment interview, the results from that questionnaire and that interview that they did with the researcher, those results predicted their child's attachment style with about 85% accuracy. And so basically what they found is how the parent tells their life story and how they regulate their emotions while doing it and how they're able to connect and communicate to the interviewer. That process, how they do that process of dealing with stress and connecting with someone, directly predicts how well that parent attaches to their child and which attachment style that child will have out of those 4 styles that we just studied. And so it's amazing to see that connection between the story that the parent tells and the attachment style of their child. And what was also discovered in this line of research was this earned security, or the earned secure attachment category was discovered. And this guy by the name of Alan Schroof, he's suggested that individuals who have come to make sense of their lives in the face of adversity have had a supportive relationship, such as a relative, a caregiver, a teacher, or a friend, that has served as a source of resilience. These findings reinforce the view that attachment is open to change and ongoing development. So there's some good news that even if we as parents had a lot of trauma and a difficult relationship with our parents, we can learn a secure attachment style with our children. We don't just have to repeat it. And what that adult attachment research also looked at was this idea of a coherent narrative. And if the parent's story during that interview with the researcher, if the parent's story made sense, if it was cohesive as a kind of a whole, which included both the negative and the positive aspects of their family background, and it also would show that the parent was able to make sense of what happened to them when they were kids, and if they're able to collaborate with the interviewer and share the story in a way that makes sense, we call that a coherent narrative. If that narrative was coherent, then their child was more secure. So that brings us to our life stories as parents. What is our life story? What do we say when we talk about who we are and how we got there, how we came to be who we are? What's our feelings about our past, and how we were parented? What's our understanding of our parents, our mom and dad, and those significant others? What was our relationship with them, and how did we respond when they behaved a certain way? Are we aware of the impact of that early environment on our development? If we've come to terms with that, and we can put that in a coherent story that makes sense, we are more likely to be able to come to terms with those things and to be able to deal with our own emotional coping styles and be able to better deal with our children's emotions. And so that's the good news. How you were parented is not the full story. The health of your connections with your children is not determined by how you were raised. Here's the keys. The key is how you've made sense of your childhood experience and how sensitive you are to your children. If you do not examine your story and don't make sense of it, you are at risk of reactively parenting how you were parented, or going in the extreme opposite direction, one of those extremes. But the pain from the past doesn't have to be passed down repeatedly. By coming to terms with our own life story and making sense of our own story, then we can be free to parent in a manner that's consistent with our values. But we have to come to terms with the good and the bad in our past, and be able to manage those emotions to be able to do that. So the good news is, with hard work, with introspection, and building brain skills, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, which is like mindfulness skills and relaxation and ways to kind of calm the storms. We can't, with all those types of hard work, we can find this, what we call earned security. Even if we didn't have a secure upbringing and our attachments were unhealthy when we were younger, we can learn to be secure with ourselves and in our interactions with our children. So that's the good news. But in order to do that, we have to do what I call befriending the elephants from our own attachment history. And really, this is from Dr. Daniel Hughes' book called Brain-Based Parenting. Excellent book. I'd recommend that. He talks about befriending the elephants from our own attachment history. These elephants are things we try to avoid or defend against: fear, anger, discouragement, shame, memories from our childhood or from our past that are hard to regulate, emotions that are hard to regulate. So basically, what we need to do is remember these things and learn to kind of calm them down and regulate these with a supportive friend that we're sharing our story with, or doing meditation and mindfulness practice or other spiritual practice where we're nurturing our soul to come to terms with these elephants that can stomp through our emotional life. So when we move past self-protection, then we can parent non-defensively. So what that basically means is, if we are constantly in this fight or flight syndrome, this self-defense mode with our children, like if our children has a certain emotion and we get into fight mode, that means that we are in this defensive stance and we're ready to duke it out with the bear when there's no bear in the room. It's just our child. It's a little 18-month-old, or maybe it's a 5-year-old. Sometimes they are like bears when they're 15 and maybe big as a bear. But if we can't get past that self-defensiveness, then we're not going to be able to bond with our children. So we have to be able to manage our own emotions, realize there's no bear in the room. I'm here with my child. It's safe. It's going to be okay. And kind of calm our own emotions down. And then we can communicate and listen and connect. And so then we can develop this coherent narrative that makes sense regarding our own history of attachment. And so if we can do that hard work, that earned security for us directly leads to a security in the child. They'll be more securely attached for their life. And so here's some questions. As you chart your course as a parent, what are your goals and what are your values? How do you want to parent? How do you want to live your life with your children for the first 18 years and even beyond into their adult lives? And it's also important to ask yourself, who has had the most positive impact on you? Maybe if there was some difficult relationships with your parents, maybe there was some other people in your life that had a more positive impact, maybe a teacher or a coach or a relative or a friend that helped you learn to navigate life's storms. We call this a healing image. If you can bring up that image of that positive influence in your life, you will better be able to use those types of values in parenting and with your own children and dealing with their life stressors. So think about who had the most positive impact on you and how do you want to pass those things on to your children. And the last question, what type of impact do you want to have on your kids? And we have to come to terms with those key questions so that we can be better able to bond and connect. And so given this idea of bonding and connection and stress and dealing with emotions. There's lots of great books out there and research that have been looking into how we can better do that. And so one of the great researchers, in my opinion, is John Gottman. He's out of the University of Washington. He's been researching families and marriages and children and relationships for decades. He has a great book. It's called Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. And he has other marriage books. One's called The Relationship Cure. Excellent research. And he has this acronym called ATTUNE. And he talks about it's basically just tuning in and being connected with your children and how to listen to their emotions. And in his book, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, he talks about being an emotion coach. How do we coach our children to deal with life's emotions? And I like this acronym that he gives on attunement. A stands for awareness of the emotion. We have to be aware of our own emotions as parents, and also then as we can do that, we're better able to key into our children's emotions. And then T is turning toward the emotion. Instead of turning away from them and ignoring them, or turning against the emotion and telling them to not feel that way or quit crying or whatever, but turn toward them gently to that emotion. And then the second T is tolerance. Tolerance of a different perspective. We can let them have their different opinion. We can agree to disagree respectfully. We can tolerate their emotions. But we just want to be with them as they're navigating the storms. And then the U stands for understanding. And then which is just that basic understanding of what they're experiencing and their emotions. And sometimes when they're little, before they have the ability to communicate those emotions, we have to give them the emotional words for how they're feeling. Like, oh, wow, Johnny, you sure look like you're mad because your toy broke. That must be really frustrating, And we give them words so that as their language skills develop, along with their emotion regulation skills, then they can learn how to communicate. But a lot of times we have to do the communication for them. As we can see their emotions and see how their body's reacting, and we can connect with them. And we call this it's like a wireless Wi-Fi connection between our brain and their brain. And there's mirror neurons in their brain and our brain that just helps us reflect and connect and copy each other's behaviors and language. And we connect with them, through Wi-Fi, the wireless connection of empathy and understanding. And the N on this ATTUNE acronym is non-defensive responding. Like we talked about, getting out of that self-protection defense mode to openness. And was it Gandhi that said you can't shake hands with a clenched fist? You can't connect with your child with clenched fists. We have to open up, put our defenses down, and understand them first. Like I said earlier, not trying to change their behavior, but valuing that relationship with them. And then lastly on that acronym, E stands for empathy, which is just putting yourself in their shoes, understanding how they're feeling, and then communicating that feeling and that understanding. That I love that acronym for tuning into them. What does it mean to tune in? If we're still in reaction mode, defensive mode, we cannot tune in. That Wi-Fi connection is broken, and there's not going to be bonding. This other acronym for connecting is by Daniel Hughes in a lot of his books. One of his books is, as I mentioned earlier, Brain-Based Parenting. Excellent researcher and clinician in attachment. He works with kids with severe attachment difficulties and helps them reconnect in really tough situations, reconnect with the people that love them. And he calls it parenting with PACE, P-A-C-E. Very powerful acronym to give us some ideas on how to connect with our children. The P stands for playfulness. Be playful. We have to be relaxed and have our guard down to be playful. So a lot of times we can get out of that defensive mode by playing a game and getting out on the floor and wrestling and playing with them and playing catch or playing a game or just having fun together. It's just a natural way to connect. The A stands for acceptance, which is acceptance of who they are, valuing them just for who they are. And so they just feel loved just for who they are, not for how they behave or not, but just accepting them and their emotions and their thoughts and their perspectives. And then the C stands for curiosity, which is you're like a detective trying to understand how they see the world and how they are thinking and why they're thinking the way they do, and just starting those conversations and really getting into a deep understanding of what makes them tick. So that playfulness, A is acceptance, C is curiosity, and then the last one is empathy, which is, again, was the last one on Dr. Gottman's list too. It's just understanding and connecting with them and communicating that you understand them and that you value them. So think of those, just those 4 points, and just remember PACE. I need to be playful, I need to accept, I need to be curious and have empathy. And that goes a long ways to building that bridge of emotional connection and bonding with their children. And it gets them out of the defensive mode. They're going to open up more when they see us being non-defensive. It's just a natural opening. And so Paul Tillich says that the first responsibility of love is to listen. And so that when we're talking about empathy, we have to listen to be able to understand their emotions. And I love the Chinese symbol for the verb to listen. And this is going way back to my Communication 101 class at Boise State University, where we studied communication. And this was in the textbook, the Chinese verb to listen. It involves the symbol for the ear, which is normal. Hey, we listen with our ears, but not only with our ears. We have to listen with our eyes. We have to put the newspaper down and look at our children and connect with them. So it's the symbol for the ears, the symbol for the eyes, and I love this. Also, undivided attention is that middle line there in that symbol. Undivided attention. We can't give them undivided attention all the time, but we have to consistently have time where we can sit down, put stuff down, put our phones down, and connect with our eyes and our ears, our undivided attention, and lastly, and maybe most importantly, listen with our heart, which again is empathy and feeling with them. So they know they have someone in their corner that can love them and understand them and root for them and cheer them on as they're, just like the brave little boat, facing those challenging waves that are coming at them, and give them that vote of confidence that they can do it, that they have what it takes to make it. And so now moving on to this idea of mindfulness and building our own self-regulation skills so that we can encourage the journeys of our children. So the research strongly suggests that mindfulness can strengthen the brain processes that are important to parenting. It's kind of like the anchor in the storm. If we can calm our own brain down with mindfulness skills, it can have amazing impact. Regular mindfulness and relaxation practice keeps our brain at its best. And it helps parents listen to and find compassion for ourselves. It also improves parenting skills to be able to be less reactive. And there's all kinds of free relaxation and mindfulness exercises. Go to marc.ucla.edu to find tons of free mindfulness exercises that are on audio that you can listen to these and download them free. And control the emotions as they get out of control by calming the brain and the body down. It's amazingly powerful to build those self-soothing skills in ourselves. There's another app called the Headspace app. You can look on that. I think they give you free, at least the 10 initial sessions for free on that, and then you can pay, a price if you want the expanded app. But there's there's hundreds of other apps out there and websites with excellent relaxation and mindfulness practice exercises. But basically what it is as we learn to just do some breathing and relax our body and our brain, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, where we kind of do some relaxation and breathing, that helps us regulate our emotions and be able to attach better with others, be able to deal with stress better, and be able to parent better. And I think it's really this bridge to the key of parenting, which is emotion regulation, dealing with our own storms so we can help our children deal with theirs. Because the happiest parents and children are those who are the most well-regulated. And so, how do we regulate? In addition to mindfulness skills, there's some other how-tos on regulation, which is take a break period. If our emotions are getting out of control, we take a time out, go do some relaxation exercises. Instead of taking a smoke break, hopefully you're not doing cigarettes, take a mindfulness breathing break. Go outside and just breathe clean air and relax your body and your mind. And then you can reflect on your feelings and reflect on how you want to parent, and then go back and respond consistent with your values. So we have to have empathy for ourselves and acceptance of ourselves so we can pass that empathy on to our children. And a lot of times we have to go cool off before we can find that equanimity or that moderation in the storm, the anchor in the midst of the waves. We must recognize false alarms. Sometimes our brain goes into false alarm state when there's really no bear there. Our brain is supposed to do that when there's a real bear, so we can either duke it out with the bear or run. But when we're interacting and bonding with our children, if we have a false alarm that, oh no, we're in danger, we have to go, wait a minute, it's just an emotion. The child is fearful or mad. We can handle this together. It's not a catastrophe. We're going to be able to make it through. Then we also have to recharge our own batteries in order to be able to regulate our emotions. So we have to do self-care. We have to exercise. We have to get enough sleep. We have to have good nutrition. We have to connect to our spiritual sources of support and connect with other people in our communities. We have to have friendships to be able to manage life's difficulties. We can't do it alone. So we have to build our own connections with other adults and families and friends so that we can better connect with our children. If we're not taking care of ourselves, it's going to be hard to nurture that relationship with our children. And so the mature brain has the capacity to use good judgment in hot moments. When we're emotionally regulated and we use mindfulness skills, we can feel and deal. And that's the core of what we call emotional intelligence. And it's also this idea of mind sight, this ability to see into someone else's mind and have empathy for them. It's being open and non-defensive in focusing on our inner lives and the inner lives of our children, which then leads us to what I call the soul of parenting, which is this idea that obstacle is the opportunity. That is the soul of parenting, that obstacles are the opportunity. And basically what we're talking about is the emotions of our children. We see them as obstacles a lot of times, but that is the essential opportunity for connecting with our children. If we can step back, open and observe and understand them, we can connect with them. So in all these obstacles and stressors and emotions, that's the very opening where we can connect. And so a lot of times it's like we're going through the storms of life and we see this big obstacle in our path, like you see in the picture, this big rock that's going to crash our boat. A lot of times our kids' emotions are this boundary that we want to get rid of or get over or tell them to quit feeling that way. But we have to take a breath, see the emotion, acknowledge the emotion and the body reaction and all that's coming at you, but then go, hey, this is an opportunity. I have an anchor. I can hold on. It's going to be okay. I've dealt with emotions like this when I was their age. It's going to be okay. I have friends that will support me. I may need to call a friend right now on the phone before I interact with my child. And then we have to stop, take a breath, open, get out of that defensive mode, open up, observe, and then we proceed. And then as we proceed, just like the little brave boat, he learned that, oh, there's a small opening there in that obstacle. And we have an opportunity to connect. And the opening gets bigger. And as we have empathy and connect with our children, they're going to be less defensive. We're going to be less defensive. And that bond will grow and grow. And so the question is, what is the next chapter in your story? What are you going to write for the next chapter in your life? How do you want to make sense of your story and bring it together so it makes a sense as a coherent narrative? And how do you want that next chapter to go in your parenting journey, in that connection with your children? That's what I want you to ask yourself. And I want to encourage you to do that self-searching and that introspection and that hard work it takes to be a parent and to deal with life storms. You have what it takes. And so I encourage you in that journey, and best wishes, and thanks so much for listening. And if there's any questions, we can respond to those. Okay, here's some questions. And there's a comment. I'm worried about my lack of natural bonding to my children. I fake it well, but fear there's something wrong with me. Well, welcome to the club. We're all humans, and we all have strengths and weaknesses. And none of us were parented perfectly, and none of us will parent perfectly. And so that's okay. But that is the first step of acknowledging, hey, I have some difficulties bonding with my children. Why is that? That's a perfect place to start in introspection of your and understanding your own story, coming to terms with how you were parented when you were a child. And then finding ways to connect with friends and family or a therapist or other individuals that will encourage your own spiritual development and help you on this emotional journey of connection. Let's see, here's another question. If the attachment becomes insecure, disorganized in the first 18 months, can you give examples of behavior seen when they're 5 or... Yes. So the disorganized, insecure attachment can be related to a lot of severe emotional disturbances, such as oppositional defiant disorder, depression, and anxiety, and so a lot of times we see aggressive acting out or strong emotions of depression and self-doubt in 4 and 5-year-olds and beyond. So a lot of times then we have to intervene then, but the intervention has to include the family and healing that attachment relationship. Let's see, this other one says, say more about the child's brain and the effect of chronic stress on the developing brain. Yes, chronic stress, there's some good videos on the Harvard's website for the developing child. They have a lot of good brief videos on that exact topic you can look at. But yeah, the chronic stress tends to make the child's brain less able to connect with others and less able to kind of calm down, less self-soothing skills, and also tends to put children at risk for highly stimulating behaviors such as chronic overuse of electronics or even getting into alcohol and substance abuse. Those powerful, yet unhealthy patterns that are used to self-medicate those strong emotions that they never learn to control in healthy ways. So again, then they will have to do their own introspection and get into some drug treatment and find ways to monitor and modulate the emotions and calm them down in healthy, nurturing ways, like we talked about earlier. Let's see. The last one here is I've been in abusive relationship for over 8 years. The abuse has come to an end. Now we're trying to repair our family relationships. Good for you. How do I help my children and rebuild the healthy relationship when they treat me like their father did? Oh, that's a great question. Yes, you have to kind of balance that firmness and the love in those situations. If they're treating you poorly, you have to set healthy boundaries so they can't hurt you physically. If it's a physical boundary, to say, hey, I'm going to go in my room and calm down until we can both be respectful, or have them have a timeout until they can come out and be respectful. A lot of times, timeout is not a punishment; it's just a removal from a positive, healthy environment. So if either of you are getting agitated and disrespectful or whatever, you can each take a timeout and cool off, come back and talk when things are calm. And also, highly recommend getting some supportive counseling to help individual with you, and also maybe your child might need some individual counseling, but also possibly and most likely some family counseling to help navigate those tough situations and repair some of that past trauma. And there is hope for being able to repair that with support and hope, and reading some of these parenting books. So best wishes. If there's any questions, just give me a call at St. Luke's at 381-5970, and we can talk about any questions you have about getting those referrals to services too. So thanks for the questions, great questions, and keep up the good work with your children. Thank you.
Dr. Olson, thank you for joining us. I think the information that you provided parents today was amazing and very applicable to a lot of the struggles they're having. I loved your analogy of the boat, because it's such a visual that we can really see our role as parents as the storms are hitting, and as the calmness and the things that we can provide our kids. So that was, I think, a really powerful way to convey that information. I think also the emphasis on mindfulness, because so often we think about emotional regulation with what our kids, what we want to see in them, and that idea that really we need to be practicing and learning that ourselves, and then how it plays off and transfers into the children and their development of emotional regulation. And it is done in such a non-judgmental, non-critical manner. It's just like these are essential tools that so often we don't know about until somebody points them out to us, and that we all of a sudden recognize, okay, these are things that we need to learn and begin practicing in our own home. And then, how we'll see those changes and shifts in our children. That a lot of it's going to come from what we learn and what we share with them within our relationship. Not to say that the part outside of the home and the counseling and treatment that goes on there is not important, but the combination of all of those aspects coming together is really where, we're going to build more strength and resiliency and wellness in our kids.
Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, wonderful information. So thank you for joining us this morning. Hope you all will be back in March. Again, we'll have Liza Long speaking in regards to her personal journey as a parent with her child and kind of working her way through the navigating the system. So thank you much. We'll see you again. Hope you'll be back.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming we can get it. You're done, Mike?